What's up, people? I'm Erica, and this is Cocktails and Capitalism, a podcast that pairs crafted beverages with stories distilled from our capitalist hellscape. We're joined by an incredible climate justice activist named Mikayla Loach. Mikayla is a fifth-year medical student and the co-host of the Yikes podcast, a show that focuses on the things that make us go yikes, from the climate crisis to racial capitalism. She's one of 3 claimants who have taken the UK government to court for handing over taxpayer money to fossil fuel companies in violation of their commitments to reach net zero emissions. Mikayla was also heavily involved in the Stop Cambo campaign that successfully shut down the development of the Cambo oil field. On top of all of this important work, Mikayla has just announced that she has a book coming out called It's Not That Radical: Climate Action to Transform Our World. And I truly can't wait to read it. I'm so excited to speak with her about her important work and the insight she's gained as a climate author, activist, and organizer. What's up, Mikayla? How you doing today?
Hey, thank you so much for having me. This is like the coolest show. Like the idea of pairing cocktails and capitalism is so fun. And I'm really excited to have this conversation.
Oh, awesome. Yeah, because the material is so heavy a lot of the time, like heavy and dark all the time, I figured it would be important to pair it with something that's light and fun and that we can enjoy at the same time as kind of making ourselves suffer by thinking about these hard things. So,
yeah, but it's important because, like, I think a lot about how Adrienne Maree Brown writes about, like, how can we make taking action the most pleasurable thing that we can do, and how can we, like, inject joy into this work so that we're making movements people want to move towards, and so I think this is a great way of doing it. So you're doing great. You don't need me to tell you that, but I just wanted to encourage.
No, I really appreciate it. Coming from you, that means a lot when you've done so much great work in the exact vein that I'm, that we need to be going in as a species. So yeah, I'm kind of in awe of everything you're doing. And I know I'm making you like blush and everything over there. I know that's probably uncomfortable, but yeah, I just need to give you those accolades.
That's very kind.
And on that note, I wanted to introduce the cocktail today, which we don't actually have a name for yet. I was hoping that maybe you could help me decide between the 3 top names that I chose. The first is the Mikayla Loach. The second is No More Billionaires. And the third is The Last Resort.
I would go with No More Billionaires because I think The Last Resort is too like bleak. It's quite like a nice I feel like, I mean, I wish I was able to be drinking it right now. I think I'm a bit later in the time zone than you, so I do have a glass of rosé with me, and my grandma, as I got it from downstairs, was like, "Yes, my dear," as I picked it up from the fridge. I think I want it to, like, inspire joy, which for me, No More Billionaires is like joy, because we live in a world where people aren't being oppressed in the same way. It's about, I think sometimes we frame action as if we're just trying to stop stuff. And obviously, we are trying to stop a lot of the bad stuff, but we're also trying to create a better world where we don't have some people who have tons of like access to joy and I don't know, capital, whatever else, and then loads of people who have nothing and are being oppressed because of those people, and
absolutely.
So yeah, I know, I like that. I would order that at a bar. I would order No More Billionaires at a bar.
Awesome. And we're hoping to like make a cocktail book in the future where we can tell the stories alongside the cocktail recipes, so we would highlight your story and all the work that you've done. But I'm gonna shake it up. I haven't actually done that yet.
Yeah.
So it's made of mezcal, grapefruit juice, lime juice, ancho reyes chili liqueur, Italicus bergamot liqueur. I don't even know how to say that. Or Saint Germain. It's like a floral liqueur. And then a pinch of salt. Also, yeah. Did I say grapefruit juice and lime juice? Did I?
Yeah. I think you did.
Okay. Okay, yeah. So I haven't tried it yet, so this is my first taste.
It sounds amazing.
Oh my God. It's really amazing. All the smoky and the floral and the fruity. Wow. Yeah, this is kind of based on Mikayla's preferences. Keep going.
I need to, like, I'm going to get all the ingredients and make sure that I make myself one of these very soon. So if for context, people listening, COP27 is happening next week, which is the biggest like climate conference in the world. And I've been very stressed trying to prep for that and have let things like getting ingredients for cocktails slide, sadly, but I will be doing it soon because joy is important too.
Dude, no problem. I would much rather you be working on that than picking up cocktail ingredients. So fuck yeah. That's awesome. Yeah. Thanks for that context. All right. Well, let's see. Since we're already kind of talking about no more billionaires, you were recently invited to the Gates Foundation Goalkeepers 2030 event, where you caused many people to audibly gasp when you announced billionaires shouldn't exist, which is just my favorite thing ever. Why shouldn't billionaires exist, and what compelled you to speak truth to power in this moment?
I was really shocked, firstly, that I was even invited. When I got the invite, I was like, do they know who I am? Do they know what I do? Because I'm quite publicly like anti the billionaire class. Like I have guides on social media about why we should abolish billionaires. Like I've done podcast episodes in which I've talked about the problem with Bill Gates framing himself as a climate leader. And so I was a bit, well, not a bit, I was hugely surprised when I got the invitation. Yeah. I took a lot of time to think about whether to go or not, because I was just like, this is not a space that I agree with. I don't believe that like philanthrocapitalism, so this kind of idea that the people who've caused this crisis, these billionaires who have hoarded wealth, that have generated that wealth because of oppression, it just doesn't come from anywhere. Mm-hmm. That they should be in control of any of the solutions is like, doesn't make any sense to me. It's completely illogical. And I think that it actually can cause a lot more harm than good in the long term of our like collective liberation and the paths that we're taking. Mm-hmm. So I took a long time to like talk to mentors and to friends and to comrades and colleagues about whether this was a good idea or not a good idea, and how I could interact with that space to kind of have a meaningful impact. And in the end decided to go, basically thinking of it as if I'm going to go, I'm going to, because it was in New York. So I made sure that I was going to connect with as many local organisers as possible in New York who are organising around abolition or justice or things like that. Like, how can I use this as an opportunity to like really build solidarity across the pond, I guess. And then secondly, that I would enter that space being my authentic self and challenge it, because these spaces don't really get challenged, because especially it's a bit more of a nuanced space, I think, maybe than others. Like there's lots of protests that happen outside of, I don't know, like the World Economic Forum or things like that, where it's like kind of obvious that like this is about capitalism. But these things where it's philanthropy doesn't really get challenged, because a lot of movements are also like dependent upon this funding. And that, I'm not saying that's necessarily like a bad thing on those groups, those movements, but it also just means that people don't challenge it, because it's like oh my gosh, I've lost the phrase, but whereas don't bite the hand that feeds you. I think a lot of people can be like that, and so can't challenge it. But I think it's important that we do. So I went in that space. I was put on a panel that came after 3 hours of panels where Bill Gates was on every single panel, which is just which was so painful to sit through and watch. And the room was also full of like that we just got an email before saying like that Secret Service agents would be there to like be protecting the like high net individuals who were there, or that like, and there's going to be intense security around the place, and like we had to be security checked on the way in and everything, obviously. And then like it was really, and then the panel that actually happened, and people can watch it on the live stream if people don't believe this actually happened, but it did happen. The panel before mine was Bill Gates and a bunch of like Cowpen, randomly the actor, and some experts in conspiracy theories, kind of talking about some important like challenging of conspiracy. Like I think there's a lot of conspiracy theories around Bill Gates need to be challenged, but the way they were framing it was as if anyone who says anything against billionaires or Bill Gates is in their words, a crazy conspiracy theorist, and that there aren't really bad guys, and that Bill is really trying to do the best thing, and that people just misunderstand him. And that was coming just before then I went on, which felt like also a bit of like nervy pressure, that I was like, oh gosh, they've just primed the audience to think that I am a crazy conspiracy theorist in their words, not mine.
Oh my God.
So I know, I was like, oh gosh. But that's why I was really intentional in that what I did say was I was deliberately trying to bring the audience with me, realizing that the space that I'm entering in is one in which there will be people in the audience who share the same views as I do, but aren't able to say anything because of their organisation that does really save people's lives in the short term, needs that funding. And there will be people in that room who will not agree with me at all but I want to still try and bring those people with me. I don't just want to like shout at everyone and be like, fuck billionaires, fuck Bill Gates. Like if I said that, no one would listen to what I was actually trying to say. So instead I tried to just be honest about that. By saying I don't feel comfortable in this space. It's not a normal space that I would find myself in, but I felt it important to be here to like make people a bit uncomfortable, and that this is making me uncomfortable too, and maybe that's a shared experience that we're having. So how can we like sit in that discomfort, which is kind of what we try and do on our podcast as well, but in a lot of the work that I'm doing, how can we sit in that discomfort to try and change things rather than just like feel comfortable with the space. But I mean, as you said before, there was I think one person who applauded when I said that I think billionaires shouldn't exist.
One
and
person?
It was just like,
oh my God,
audible gasps. Yeah, one person, and lots of shocked faces, because apparently this is the first time that anyone has ever said anything within that space to actually challenge the premise of that space, which is kind of wild to me. That I was like, these events have been going on for probably decades, like, and the fact that this has never happened before, I think a lot of people were quite grateful for that challenge, but it was quite scary, but I'm really glad now. I'm really glad I did it.
Well, and to see you say that on stage like that, while as a soft black girl, as you call yourself, wearing like this bright pink outfit, you're just like making this beautiful statement really boldly. I was so floored when I saw that. Like, holy fucking shit, this girl, she is doing the work. She is saying the exact right things to the exact right people. And, and in making people uncomfortable, you are inviting a discussion, you're spurring conversation, so many people getting coverage of these topics, these talking points. You brought so much attention to it. So I think there's a really good strategy there as well to speak truth to power in these spaces. So bravo, cheers to you.
Well, thank you. Honestly, thank you so much. That's really kind, because I can't really fully express, but I felt so nervous in doing it because I still wasn't sure if it was the right thing to do, literally up until after I'd done it. Like, I was like, by being here, am I legitimizing this space in any way? Like, just by being present, by and by having like a kind of, I guess, a calm conversation in these spaces, am I legitimizing it? And so it was really actually like really heartwarming, also for people to have seen the like pressure that was, and the thought that went into it, and like how stressful it was. And I was very intentional with like, if I'm going to go into this space, I'm going to be my full self. I'm going to wear a great pink outfit. I'm going to have my fro looking fresh and fine. And I am going to like walk on the stage feeling like I kind of had to feel like I was fabulous in order to have the courage kind of to say things in those spaces, because I think you need to like, it's kind of my armor, I think sometimes in some ways, it's like wearing bright colors, bright pink, and like feeling fab, because it kind of holds me in that. And it might seem like trivial to other people, but I think it's really important that we feel like confident. And what you're saying about speaking truth to power in those spaces, I think that a lot of this, and I think a lot more people are starting to do these things more, like challenges to people in power is a thing that I think is being used. It's been used as a strategy for a very long time, but especially in recent years, almost exactly a year before the Gates challenge, so that happened this year, a group of us found out that TED, so TED Talks TED, they were having a conference in Edinburgh, which is a city that I was living in at the time, and the city that I've organised in, where I've done a lot of my climate work, and they were having this like TED Countdown conference, which is this like climate conference. And they had invited the CEO of Shell, one of the biggest polluters, to that conference to speak on a panel. And a bunch of us were like, this is absolutely fucked. Like, they can't do that. Like, that's so wrong. We have to challenge it. And I wasn't in Edinburgh at the time. But so I remotely like kind of organised a bunch of people, a group of us organised to get a local activist from Scotland on the panel to challenge Ben Van Beurden, the CEO of Shell. And so my friend Lauren went on that panel and challenged Ben Van Beurden about the fact that the Cambo oil field that you mentioned before was being approved by Shell whilst they're on a panel talking about how they care about climate, which was ridiculous. And I think that I held a lot of the power that we had managed to do, like through that kind of challenge there, that also had a huge impact on the world. And it's made me realize that we don't have to go into these spaces and if someone's asking you into a space, they want your full self. That's what I think. Or you should be your full self. And that means you should challenge every opportunity. And that maybe sometimes actually the harder option, which sometimes is showing up and challenging, because it is fairly easy to just say no and to not go. But sometimes the harder option of showing up and challenging is what can have a really big impact. But it's hard to know what is the right or wrong thing to do. But I think that we need to challenge these things, and I think it can have a huge impact.
Well, you're doing it in brilliant ways, in so many ways. In a very similar vein, I'm very curious about, you've repeatedly stated that billionaire philanthrocapitalism cannot save us. Can you explain what you mean by this? Why isn't the charity of the rich a real solution to the huge problems society is going to face in the coming years?
So the thing with a lot of billionaires' philanthropy, or them, quote unquote, as they see it, as giving away their wealth, what they aren't doing is giving away any power. So what they're doing is basically, especially Bill Gates, for example, and Jeff Bezos and whoever else is especially investing in climate, Elon Musk as well, they're seeing that the climate crisis is a reality that is going to face all of us. It is already happening actually currently, but it's going to impact more of humanity more and more. And what they're seeing is how can we continue to hold the same amount of power and control as we've managed to hold over the world as it is now for the future. And so their investment in climate solutions isn't really about trying to solve the crisis. It's about trying to maintain control over the future of its maintain relevancy and like what solutions are being pursued. Like for example, on the African continent, a lot of Bill Gates' work now is around agriculture and in the face of climate change, trying to what he sees as like saving Africa or whatever, which obviously is inherently like really colonial and gross as a concept. But but also it's the fact that he's choosing what solutions are being pursued. It's not listening to like civil society or like it's not listening to the peoples who exist in those areas. It's dictating onto them what should be the solution and what should be followed. And the solutions that are being dictated are ones which allow capitalism to continue and to adapt for longer, and are solutions which allow a system where billionaires are even able to exist to continue, because it is simply like, and I don't think it's this like evil plot that they have. And I think that's a misconception. I think that some people act as if it's like billionaires are sitting like around a table plotting like, how can we continue to control the world and be evil? Yeah. I think it's actually like that privilege obscures our view of how we see the world. Like, I think privilege is kind of like this fog that like obscures us from the real connections that we have between each other. Like as humans, we are all connected to each other. Like that's why everything that we have in our lives is connected to like so many other people, because things don't just appear, like our lives don't just appear, like systems don't just appear. It's all through connections. But when you are a billionaire and you have an obscene level of wealth that has been generated off the backs of millions of people, like you don't see those people, and you are surrounded by people who also have the same amount of wealth. You are unable I think their imagination is so constricted that they are unable to think of solutions to the climate crisis that do not continue to benefit them. And that's why I think they shouldn't be in control of any of the solutions, because they simply do not have the capacity to select or to pursue solutions that will really benefit all of us, because it'll be inconceivable to them that they are the problem, I think, to some extent as well. And so that's why what I was trying to say as well there was that it's not just about redistributing wealth. While redistributing wealth is really important, and while and I think that it's like a key thing that as a collective, like we all need to be thinking of, is like, how do we redistribute our wealth? But it's about redistributing power too, of who gets to decide what solutions are pursued, what communities are being prioritized. Because, for example, if Bill Gates really wanted to tackle the climate crisis with the immense wealth that he has, he would be funding like indigenous resistance groups all over the world who are on the front lines of this crisis, who are really have, in the US and Canada alone, 20% of emissions have been prevented from indigenous resistance alone, which is a huge amount. That's more than any technological advance. That's more than like any of these like things that these billionaires are pushing for or giving funds to or creating prizes for. But the thing is that those those communities and those groups challenge the foundations of capitalism. They challenge like the foundations of white supremacy and of the world that we live in, and of all of those foundations that allow these billionaires to continue to generate so much wealth. And so they aren't going to fund them because they don't want to be challenged. And that's inherently the problem, is that like, we need to redistribute power as well as wealth. And that means like, really kind of reconfiguring things, and not just like kind of these kind of charitable donations that are like such a minuscule percentage of their wealth as a whole as well. And obviously a lot of that is done to avoid tax and things like that as well. But it's also being like, how can we change who makes the decisions, who really like not controls the world, but like who really like has agency in what we're pursuing. And it's also really hard to talk about this without sounding like a conspiracy theorist, and so that's why it's really hard to tread that line, because it has I think that I don't know what I'm saying here, but just that this is not about like some plots. It's about the realities of like how power works in this world, I think, and how we can redistribute that.
Yeah, definitely. And just the thought that it would ever be in the interest of billionaires to undermine their own power in a really significant way, like that's not going to happen. I think, I heard you. Who says the quote about like not being able to disassemble the master's house with the master's tools?
Audre Lorde.
You said that before. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. So, I mean, that was a brilliant take on why billionaires are not going to save us, and why they're not the solution to our problems right now. It's a huge pet peeve of mine that people would even think that billionaires would have the capacity to make decisions about what are the right things to invest in, what are the right, solutions to the problems that we're facing. They're rich people that get really, really, into their own heads, into their own egos. I did an episode with a woman called Political Psych with Abby. She has a YouTube channel and Instagram presence, but she uses psychology to talk about political issues, and she basically broke down why the rich don't give. Once they start making a lot of money, the proportion of their wealth that they're willing to give away gets smaller and smaller and smaller. So so that is not in no way a sustainable solution to funding solutions for problems. Yeah.
No, especially when there's a quote by Ruth Wilson Gilmore where she says that I'm going to butcher the quote, but it's like, but she basically what she's basically saying is that this money in the first place was owned by the workers, and then it's just it was stolen from them. Stolen wages, that's it. Philanthropy is the reallocation of stolen wages by private hands, or something like that. But I think that's what's important to remember, is that this wealth didn't come out of nowhere. Like, billionaires don't become a billionaire by accident. It's not like they just like accidentally. It's not like they like accidentally won the lottery to become a billionaire. Like, it's a really it's a long process that requires a lot of choices to be made along that process, to not be equitable and to not like be thinking of the people or the collective. And so like, we can't expect people who've made that many decisions to then be the ones to like decide the solutions. It should be that the power to decide is given to the communities that are most impacted, and they're really doing the work to transform the world.
Absolutely. Perfectly put. So pivoting a little bit, what brought you to the climate justice movement? Why did you decide to get involved, and like, what did that involvement look like early on?
So I think I had a bit of a not linear way into climate work, because growing up as someone who's racialized as Black and socialized as a woman, I was like, there are so many more pressing problems than the climate crisis. I was like, police brutality isn't a more pressing problem. Poverty is a more pressing problem. Like, racism, white supremacy, whiteness. These are all problems that felt more immediate. Yeah. That I felt like people who were doing climate work were just expecting communities that are being impacted by things today to kind of like put their issues on hold. And that didn't like feel right to me. And it felt like it was this kind of problem for people who didn't really have problems right now. But then it was actually, so I started off kind of getting involved with migrant justice work. So on the border of the UK and France, there's a town called Calais, which is like a border town, and there's also one called Dunkirk. And in both Calais and Dunkirk, there are displaced communities there. So people who have travelled across Europe, fleeing war or persecution, or just like wanting to be reunited with their families, or for whatever reason, and are treated absolutely horrendously by the French police there, and by obviously the UK's hostile environment policy. And back in, I actually can't remember what year it was, I think it was 2016, there was a picture, I'm not sure if it made it onto US newspapers as well, but in the UK, there's a picture of a 3-year-old boy called Alan Kurdi, who his family had fled Syria, and had their boat that they'd taken across the channel to Greece had sunk, and his 3-year-old body was photographed on the beach. And that had a huge impact on me, because I think I was 2.5, I think, or around 2.5 or 3 when we moved to the UK from Jamaica. Wow. And the only reason that I was able to easily and without having to without being forced into a dangerous route, was because I had British citizenship by complete chance. Like all of this stuff, I don't feel that far divorced from this, because I realised like how much of where you're born or what passport you get is really by chance, and I didn't feel like I was too far away from people who are being displaced, because it is really just chance, like where you end up being. And so I felt really I think that photograph and that the experience that people were having then really got me more active, and I started going to Calais whenever I could to provide like material help on the border to displaced communities, like chopping veg or chopping wood or sourcing out clothes, or just like really basic stuff, like not like but that showed me that a lot of the work that needs to be done isn't actually that dramatic or that like complex. So I think that I'd had this idea of activism as being this thing that's just done by exceptional individuals, and it's public speaking and like protesting and organising actions and things like that. But being there, I think I met all these incredible people who, like, being active or being an activist was just deciding to do something, and like whether it was small or big, or whether it was like flashy or not, like it was just deciding to do something. And that really made me realise that also are in power, and that we don't need to wait for big governments or NGOs or big organisations to do something in order to take action. Like the main support that was being given, and solidarity support that was being given to these communities, was being done by just a bunch of students that just saw this was happening and saw that no NGO was intervening, because the UK government and the French government refused to see this as an actual refugee camp, and they were just like, we're going to go and support. And I think that showed me that, like, activists are just ordinary people, and we need just ordinary people to realise they're in power when they come together. And then, basically I was doing that work at the same time as starting to care more about the climate crisis, because realising how much it was impacting Jamaica, which is obviously my ancestral home. But then I thought that the only thing we could do about climate was to change our lifestyle choices, which is like, it's a bit ridiculous to me to think that now, with now all I know. But at the time, we were told is just, change how you live your life, and that will help save the planet. But I started to realise that that's just not enough, and it felt inconsistent. And I came across this concept of climate justice, which tied these issues that I cared about, of racial injustice and migrant injustice, and like capitalism and moving against capitalism and climate, all together into one. And it showed me that in order to tackle this crisis, in order to tackle the climate crisis, we do not have to leave behind other struggles. In fact, as the climate crisis was caused by white supremacy, by capitalism, by these oppressive systems, in order to adequately tackle it, it requires us to go to the root of all these issues, and therefore actually create a better world for all of us. And so it's not just about continuation of the world as it is now, it's about transformation. And that got me really like excited about climate work, because it felt like it was the best opportunity that we have to really transform the world is by tackling the climate crisis with this lens of justice. And then from then I got involved with direct action and blocking roads and, you know, chaining myself to stuff. And then now I do more communications based work, and have had court cases, done lots of different tactics, because I do feel like in many ways, like, we are in last resort stage when it comes to climate, and last resort stage doesn't mean that we panic, because I don't think any good work comes from panic. I think that it just means that we take this seriously and we act with urgency, and also that we realize that, like, all of us have a huge opportunity to transform the world, and it's at our fingertips and it's in front of us, and we have power to do that. But it requires all of us to actually realize that power and then act on it. And that climate justice is actually really hopeful and exciting.
I love that so much, seeing this crisis as an opportunity for us to transform our world, to create something better. I mean, it really is that. One of my favorite books of all time is a book called Apocalypse and or Metamorphosis by Norman O. Brown. And that, I feel like that epitomizes so much of what we're looking at with capitalism, with climate change. Like, either we're going to metamorphosize, create something totally new and totally better for us, or it's going to be an apocalypse. So it is on us right now to do that work, to create a better world. And if we look at it as an opportunity and not just a nightmare, we're going to do much better work, you know?
Yeah, and I think I've read a lot, and this is something I write about a bit in the book as well, in the book I've just recently written that will be out soon. But it's not that radical is what it's called. But it's about climate action to transform our world. And I think that I've been hugely inspired because I was, when actually we first connected, I was living in Colombia, and there communities were facing an existential threat today. Like, the Colombian government, like, was an existential threat to indigenous communities and to the Black community all over Colombia, as were people. An existential threat is not a new thing. Like, so many communities were literally afraid of, and I mean, not that this has just gone away because of the election, but just that there are so many communities all over the world that have fought existential threats, and rather than, like, choosing to give up, have instead come together and built power and caused transformation. And that is so possible. And we saw that in Colombia because, like, overthrowing 200 years of elite rule, like, that takes generational organizing and generational power building, and that takes like a huge amount of work, but a huge amount of belief and hope in transformation and the possibility of that. And I think that we can learn so much from communities who've done that. Like, I learned a huge amount from communities in Colombia who are organizing, from people and activists and just conversations with people who, in the face of that huge, like, I think that sometimes in the UK, for example, we can think that we have it, not that we don't have it bad, but, like, people will be like, oh, we've had a Conservative government, a Tory government for the last, 12, however many years. This is too bad, we can't do anything. And I'm like, imagine if you'd had 200 years of elite rule and you still decided to organize for generations, even not knowing whether the future would be guaranteed or would be and I think that that's what we can learn so much from, and that we need to remember that like, we don't take action because we know that everything's going to be okay. We take action because we have no other choice but to try and make things more than okay, but to try and transform things. And I think that that's what kind of motivates me, because I think back to when my ancestors in Jamaica, like, my ancestors, when they were enslaved in Jamaica, when, like, they had to believe that something better was coming, like, and they had to organize to believe that something better was coming. And maroon communities in Jamaica had to organize to believe that something better was coming. And so it's Mary Anise Hegler writes a lot. She wrote a brilliant essay called like, saying that climate change isn't the first existential threat, where she talks about this. And I think that's something that we can learn so much from, and that we have to believe in that we can transform things, and that a better world is possible. Otherwise what are we doing? like we have to believe that. We have to have hope.
Otherwise, what are we going to do? Just give up and just sit down and call it a day and see the world go down? Like, no. No. I love it. I love that approach. And, this is the perfect transition to talking about a quote from Vogue magazine. You're quoted as saying, I do think all of us in many ways are at the last resort stage. I've tried using our elections to create change. I've tried changing my lifestyle choices. I've tried using social media to my best ability. I've tried direct action, and still we are heading towards complete climate disaster. I really think many people, and young folks specifically, will identify with this message. Since we've entered the last stage, the last resort stage, what do you think we do now? What's the next step? And what do you see as the most effective strategies and tactics for addressing the increasingly urgent climate crisis?
So I think I also said it in another part of that article, but I think that I literally believe with all of my being that the only thing that will save us, because there aren't superheroes in this world, sadly. Like we're not waiting for the coming of a great leader to solve everything for us. Like billionaires won't save us. Our governments have proven, to be honest, that they aren't going to save us, like currently, on the track that we're going. And I'm speaking for my context, especially in the UK. And so the only thing that will save us is building really, really strong collectives and communities that will force a new world to come, and that will really like transform the world. And I think that means like, I have friends who work doing indigenous resistance in Mexico, and a lot of what they're doing is trying to build like resilience and power in their communities, so that they are like autonomous as well, and so they have huge amounts of power. And I think there's so much we can learn from like obviously the Zapatista movement that has done that. I think that what we need to do is like just like we need to really build power, and I feel that sounds really like vague, but I think that things only change if we really make them change, and that's happened in the past and it will happen in the future. And I think that last resort stage means, I think it's hard to talk about this without being doomy, because I don't want to believe that like that everything is going to be the worst that it can be. Yeah. But we also have to approach everything with a realism that sees that like things are currently not going very well. They're not going in a good way. Yeah. And that we do have an ability to change that, but the only way that we'll change that is if, to be honest, if enough of us, and it's not just about critical mass, but it's about critical connections. It's like if enough people like approach this crisis with an awareness of our own power, and that we need to actively transform the world. So that means like joining a group in your local community and offering your like time or your skills or whatever it is to aid the campaigns that are already happening, or the kind of the world building work that's already happening. Whether that is, and I don't just mean by that like direct climate work. I mean like I see climate work as much bigger than just like, you know, saving the trees or just like decreasing emissions. It's also like, how do we create the conditions for a liberated world? And so maybe that's doing like abolitionist work against like the carceral system, and that will mean that people are able also to do more actions, because they're not going to be fearing like in the UK currently we have a public order bill that's going through that means that, I mean, it means that for things I'm saying here, I could, in the next couple of years, I could be forced to wear an electronic tag by the government if this bill goes through, and check in to my local police station every now and then, just because of, which is, it's truly like quite scary how things are going. And that's why like abolition work is climate work as well, not just because obviously it allows people to then do a lot of climate work, but it also means that like we are living in like a society that's based on care and wellness as well, and not about like violence and harming each other, which I think is a necessary condition for a liberated future and for climate, and for like a climate just future. So it's like thinking about how can all of us knowing how can all of us like connect with our own power? How can all of us like build power in our communities? How can all of us like get to be part of that transformational change, and realize that it's not going to come from anyone else. Like, I am not going to be the savior of humanity. No one is going to be the savior of humanity. No one is going to solve all these problems. It requires kind of us to do it. And I think that I'm also cautious because I don't want to scare people into doing this. Like, I don't want people to be like, oh, I'm so scared of the future, therefore I'm going to take action, because I don't think that's a sustainable way to do it. I think find your reason to want this world to continue, or find your reason to like want what do you want to be better? What excites you so much about making the world better that you can do nothing but act? Like, what is that thing? Like, what do you love so much about being alive, and how can you do more of that in a way that like creates a better world for us all? And I think that that's how we can be motivated, is by joy and by pleasure and by transformation rather than just despair. Because I don't think that's scaring people, it doesn't work. And that's why I get so frustrated with so much climate storytelling like Don't Look Up, that I found deeply frustrating, because I was like I left watching that being like feeling awful. It doesn't make me be like, I'm gonna take things down. It's like, oh gosh, we're screwed, and all we can do is sit around a dinner table and talk about it. Like it's like, no, we can organize, we can do things. So I just think that realizing our own power, I think, is the best thing that we can do, and then acting on it.
And I love that, like, realizing your own power can look like showing up for your community and bringing food for people that need food, bringing supplies for people that need support. You know, it's essentially a lot of the time mutual aid that builds those kinds of communities, that build those that kind of power that can challenge, capitalist power structures. So, I love that you kind of got into your activist work by doing that kind of just immediate direct aid, immediate mutual aid work, you know. Were you going to say something?
Yeah, because I think that like mutual aid is one thing that's really going to like save, like in the face of a cost of living crisis, where in the UK, for example, we're seeing like energy companies make their biggest profits in history. Meanwhile, like millions of families in the UK are being plunged into poverty, like where they cannot feed their children, which is absolutely like awful. Like families are being plunged into like extreme debt because of like foods, like paying for meals at school, which is like ridiculous. Like so many people are going to be killed by capitalism because of this quote unquote cost of living crisis. And the way to respond to it is to be like, how can we share things within our community? How can we build systems in our community in which that we are as a community resilient to the kind of the forces of capitalism, or the power that is exerted on us by corporations or by whatever else? Like, how can we do that? And I think that is climate work, because it's like, how can we have an energy system that works for us? It's like, let's have community owned energy. Let's like, and to do those kind of things, it requires you to talk to your neighbors and to like talk to people in your community and get people on board, and to like, and to work together in a way in which we realize that like our collective survival is dependent upon each other. Like whether we are like joyful or we are sad, or we are like well or we are like unwell, is dependent on each other, and like how much we look after each other, and how much we hold each other. And I think a lot about this. There's a film called Pride. I don't know if you've watched it, but it's about like solidarity. It's so good. It's about basically back in like the 80s, when Margaret Thatcher was Prime Minister in the UK. There was miners' strikes, which basically like the miners all across the country were going on strike because the government was threatening to like shut down the mines and really impact people's lives and communities that have been miners for generations. And this film basically like it shows this solidarity that was built between queer communities in the UK, in London, and mining communities, which are two communities that you'd expect would like not really like get on very well, especially in the UK. The mining communities like are traditionally like quite homophobic or very homophobic, and like not and really rural. And what happened is that these like queer community in London, so they call themselves lesbian and gays to support the miners, they realised that the police were no longer harassing them outside of their clubs as much, and so they must be harassing someone else, because they realised that and so they were like, oh, we're gonna go, who are they harassing? And it's they're going and they're harassing the miners on the picket lines. And so they were like, how can we realise that just because, and I said it on the Bill Gates challenge bit, but like, we all need to realise that just because something's hurting me doesn't mean it's not going to hurt you at some point, doesn't mean it's already not hurting you in some different way. Absolutely. We need to realise that all of our liberation and everything is connected. And that's what these like the lesbian and gay support the miners realise, is that their like gay liberation was connected to the liberation of workers, and that they had to work together, and that solidarity means like there's someone on it that says like solidarity is like saying that like I'll hold your hand and you'll hold mine no matter what it is, and they have this like banner where they show the two hands being held together, and that we've got each other's backs, and it's only like having each other's backs that can really like face up to the huge powers that be and that we can see that are coming towards us. It's only if we like really like hold each other that we can do it. And I think that and that's the kind of storytelling, actually, so going back to what I was saying about climate storytelling, that's the kind of storytelling we need, is like showing our like community power and showing like what holding each other can do, and showing like the power we can have as communities to do that. And that's what we really need to like and that's what saving ourselves mean. It doesn't mean like this heroic one day everything's fine. It means like over generations holding each other and building building community and building connections to each other and resilience.
Oh, that's so beautiful. I love that so much. And it reminds me of that you know, that chant that goes, who keeps us safe? We keep us safe. You know, it's in relation to policing, in relation to climate change, and the kinds of, you know, ramifications that poor people around the world are going to feel because of that, and how people are going to show up for them. Like, we need to keep us safe because no one else is going to do it. So, and I have to check out that movie. That's awesome. Did you want to talk a little bit about, since I asked about the tactics and strategies that you found most effective in addressing the climate crisis, do you want to talk a little bit about the work that you did with Extinction Rebellion, or any of the other tactics that you used?
Yeah, sure. I can specifically talk about I can do a bit of a journey. So I think I started out in climate being like, the problem is that people don't know, which is a classic thing that people say in climate. They're like, oh, we just need to inform the public. Because I think a lot of people who got into climate work had this like awakening. It's like, oh, you have this like epiphany moment of like, oh, and you want to recreate that moment for other people. So I think that then you can then believe that the problem is that people don't know. But I think that, so I started off doing social media stuff, or like under Extinction Rebellion, like my job was in the media team. So we would do like spokesperson trainings where we'd empower people to tell their own climate story. We would like talk to local media in Scotland or like global media when we're doing actions and try and get the word out. And a lot of our actions, some of them were based on just trying to kind of get media attention. A lot of them were also based on deliberately trying to cause like disruption to the government. For example, like our site was outside of the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, and it was called Power in Truth because it was all about the huge amount of money that the government gives to oil and gas companies every year, and we blocked the road out there, and obviously it would have caused like financial disruption to the government, which is I think is an important like tactic, is causing that disruption. But I think that what I've learned, so then, sorry, I'm taking my time, but after that, just to give a quick chronology, after that then was still using social media to raise awareness, but then did a court case against the UK government, which we mentioned before, where we used the legal route to try and first get the information out there so it's on public knowledge, because the government had denied that they give huge amounts of money to oil and gas companies every year. So basically in the UK, they had made the North Sea, which is off the coast of Scotland, the most profitable place in the world to extract oil and gas, because they would not make oil and gas companies pay any tax on multiple years. So companies like Shell and BP didn't pay any tax on some years, which is ridiculous. And they would actually pay them back in subsidies. But they denied that. So we managed to get them to admit that in court. But basically took the legal route, took the direct action route, took the like raising awareness route. And I think that a lot of things that I've learned from a lot of this is that I don't actually think that the problem is that people don't know. I think that the vast majority of the population, studies have shown, polling has shown, like people in the UK, for example, as a case study, like people really care about the climate crisis and they know it's happening. They know that, I think it's in the UK, 65% of the population are deeply worried about climate, and it's something that they think about when they're even voting. Like people do care and they know it's happening. I think the problem is that people don't know what to do about it, or people think that we have no power in the face of it. And so I think I've pivoted a lot of the work that I do. It's no longer just trying to like, I'm not trying to be like, the climate crisis is happening, like pay attention. But I think people know. I think I'm more now, my work is more about like movement building and being like, you already know this is happening, but this is what you can do about it. Or you already know something's off. this is what we can do about it. Because I think whether people know the ins and outs of climate, they know that something is really not okay, like with the world, and they know that it's not helping, like benefiting a lot of us. And a lot of people, the only kind of solution to that they're being told by like the mainstream media or whatever is to like just work really hard, or to become a billionaire, or to win the lottery, or whatever. And it's like none of these are real solutions to the crisis that we're facing. Like all they're being told to just do lifestyle changes. The real solution is to come together in collectives and communities and to build power and to take down like the class that are oppressing us all, the elite class that are oppressing us all, and the systems that are doing that. And so I think now I still think I would use a lot of the similar tactics. I think direct action is really, really important and has been shown by so many communities around the world. But I think that thinking about strategically about what is, like, how does every action we're doing, like, how does that contribute to building power? Like, how does that set the, create the conditions for a transformed world to be possible? And I think that's what I now think of more than just like, let's just reach as many people as possible, or like, let's just tell people about this. It's like, what is going to be the material impact of this beyond just awareness.
That's really important.
And actually something that I'd like to say on that is just that with the Stop Cambo campaign is an example that I can use of that, because Cambo was the biggest it was one of the biggest oil fields in the North Sea, and it basically was about to be approved by Shell and Siccar Point Energy, which is now Ithaca Energy, were trying to approve the Cambo oil field. And previously, like, oil fields have just gone through in the UK without disruption. I think in the US there's been a much more, like, because in the US a lot of the oil fields are like on land, and therefore there's a lot more like a direct action that happens around them and resistance. But I think because these oil fields in the UK are like in the middle of the sea, far off the coast of Scotland, they've kind of like slipped through the cracks, I think, a bit. And people haven't really there've been tons of campaigning and generations of campaigning that set the groundwork, actually, to be honest, for Stop Cambo to be possible. But the general public and the mainstream have not really cared as much. But with COP26 happening in Glasgow, it was an opportunity for us to kind of change the tone and on these oil fields. And that campaign used a bunch of different strategies. So like we launched the campaign with direct action, and we occupied the UK government's building in Edinburgh for a day, and we did tons of media strategy to try and like put pressure on. But the thing was that is it wasn't just trying to raise awareness. It was being like, this awareness raising is in order to put pressure on. Like, it was very specific, and it meant that like by the time COP came around, Boris Johnson, who was the Prime Minister then, we've had I don't know, 2 others since, which is wild. Oh God, yeah, but, Jesus. He was questioned by every journalist, like international journalists, like domestic, like everyone was asking him about the Cambo oil field because of our campaigning and because of how much pressure had been put on. Like, Nicola Sturgeon was challenged. Like, every major party leader felt like they had to have a stance on it. And that was using a multiplicity of tactics and a multiplicity of like avenues. Like, there was a court case around Cambo as well. Like, and I think that's how we win. It's not by just saying, this is the one way to do things and this is the one best tactic. Like, it's just direct action, or it's just like doing media, or it's just this. It's like, no, let's use absolutely everything we have in our arsenal. Let's get a bunch of people who have so many different like skill sets and bring all these people together and make a campaign that wins. And a campaign that wins uses as many different tactics as possible. Absolutely. I love that. One of the things that I've come to in discussions with other leftists about the right way to protest, the right way to make your voices heard, is that like, if we, a lot of people have different opinions about what is the right way to do things, but it's key on the left, because we're so diverse, to accept the diversity of approaches and tactics and not say, oh, that person over there, I condemn them and I'm going to, I don't identify with what they're doing. Like, we need to just accept that there is going to be different people approaching the problem in different ways, and recognize that they're all part of this work to find a solution to try to change the way that our planet is being run. So, I don't know. I don't know if I articulated that well, but and that's kind of like, no, you did. And I think that's something that I think a lot of us Yeah, I think that we do need a bunch of different strategies. And I think it's hard because I can also sometimes, like, all of us can, I'm sure, in different ways, be like, think that, oh, that's not the right way of doing, or whatever else. And maybe sometimes it's not, but like, I think that in reality, like, we do just need like a diversity of tactics, because that's what really does win in the end. Like, I didn't think I fully explained, but in just 6 months, we managed to stop one of the biggest oil fields in the North Sea from being approved. And that was just like a bunch of people coming together and being like, we're not going to let this happen. And that was only possible because if we just used one of those tactics, like, I think that Cambo would have been approved. But it was because it was like absolutely unavoidable for them to do it. Like, we made it so that it was framed within the industry as a death knell for North Sea oil and gas. Like, we made it so that, like, they said it was uninvestable. Cambo was uninvestable, and like that is in some way using the system, like, as well. Part of that, but it's like part of that was like having to use the system, because I think sometimes there is and this is something I write about in the book a bit, is that I think that sometimes there's a misinterpretation of Audre Lorde's essay, The Master's Tools Can Never Dismantle the Master's House, because some people take that one, because I think the people are taking the quote rather than the essay, because they're taking the quote and being like, that means that we can never use any part of the system in order to create a better world. But what she was actually saying is that we can't use the same, like, oppressive values or structures in order to create something better. And there's a concept that's called like non-reformist reform, which basically like is an abolitionist concept that realizes that, like, there are parts of the system that we will have to use in order to create the material conditions for revolution to be possible, for complete transformation to be possible. But we only use those parts that don't allow the system to adapt and continue for longer. So, because that's my problem. That's a problem with reform, is like how it can allow the system to adapt and continue for longer. And so that's how I kind of like view actions that are happening. I'm like, does this create the conditions for revolution or for transformation to be possible, even if it is using some parts of the system? Because for Cambo, for example, if all these oil fields are approved, it would be catastrophic for our future and for our planet. And so, like, stopping them from being approved, and that some of that will require, like, I don't know, using parts of the system, like talking to politicians and stuff and getting them to challenge it or whatever else it is. Stopping that is an essential part of a future for all of us. And so, I think sometimes maybe people can take the radness of everything a bit too far, as like, we can never use the system. And I'm like, actually, I think we need to think critically of like what is strategic and what is not strategic. But I don't know if I fully explained that well. It explains it better in whatever I've written in the book, but I think I'm now like, it's floating around.
And I think it brings me back to what you were saying about whether or not you were going to go on stage at that, Bill Gates event, that, the decision whether or not to participate within the existing power structures and engage on that level or not. And I think a lot of people, like, looked at Chris Smalls meeting the president and said, oh, he's going to get corrupted and co-opted, and his, he's a traitor to the cause because he's shaking hands with the president. I'm like, no fucking way, guys. Like, he is using his platform that he has earned to spread this message on the highest levels. We need that, like, you do it. If we can do it, then do it. Don't like make shady deals behind the scenes that are going to make you beholden to these politicians, of course, but don't rule out even showing up to that conversation, because sometimes showing up to that conversation and making a statement like wearing an Eat the Rich jacket or saying billionaires shouldn't exist, that is going to start a discussion, start people thinking in the direction that we need to be thinking, and not just in your echo chamber, people outside of that. That's so fucking key. Like, if you're not speaking to other people that aren't already the choir that you're preaching to, then what are you doing? Like, so I don't know. I think,
exactly, because like, I think that's just the thing, is that I think so often, so there's a chapter in the book called like, what's currently called, maybe the title of this will change by the time, but it's currently called Too Radical or Not Radical Enough. And it's this whole discussion of like, because I think that there can be this thing within like leftist spaces of like, this person isn't radical enough or whatever else, and like this kind of like discussion sometimes. And I think that like accountability is important, and like listening to your communities is really, really important. But I think at some point, and this is what I write about, is like is what are we trying to do? Are we just trying to impress and say the right thing to tick the boxes of the people within our movement, or are we trying to really build power and transform the world? And because I realized that in the past on media interviews, like when I was first doing media interviews, I think it's so silly, like it's so funny to talk about now, but like I think I almost like was like, if I say the right key terms, then like people within my movement will be like, yeah, she said like white supremacy on the news or whatever. Like, but yeah, you know, like that kind of stuff of like, oh, then I will have done a good interview. And actually, like, I was challenged by like by mentors and by peers and comrades that I work with to be like, but like the mum who's washing up the dishes in the background and has like her 4 kids like asking her questions, who has the news on, is she going to understand what you're talking about if you're just using jargon that people within the movement understand what it means? And who are we really trying, like what are we really trying to do? Are we just trying to like pat ourselves on the back for like knowing the right words, or are we trying to actually do things and create things? And I think that's something that we could all be challenged more to do. And there was someone, I actually can't remember the name of the person sadly, but they wrote on Twitter about like you can't have good politics without organizing, because like good politics like pushes us to realize the only way that we can transform things is by doing it and by being parts of these collectives and communities. And so it's not just about like knowing the right stuff or like feeling good about yourself because you like know stuff. And I think that there can be this idea of that being good politics. And I think good politics is like, is what we do, and it's what we create.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, I'm going to kind of jump ahead in the questions that I had, but just because we're talking about something that's so related, but I just really love that you're committed to participating in the climate justice movement accessible, making it intelligible, making it, you know, just not out of reach of anyone who wants to become an activist, become an organizer. So given all of your experience as an activist and an organizer, what have you learned that can help to make this vital movement more inclusive and more accessible?
So the reason that we started the Yikes podcast was because myself and Joe, who hosts it with me, we both met in Extinction Rebellion. Also, for clarity, both of us have now left Extinction Rebellion a couple of years ago because of other issues. But we found that before joining, for both of us, we felt like activism or organizing was this like really like exclusive hub where people know all the right words. And I even felt like when I first joined a lot of groups, I felt like I didn't know the language to even exist there, and that I didn't have the background, enough knowledge or whatever else to be able to do stuff. Like I felt super intimidated. And I think we wanted to create something where we could be like, people could realize that a lot of people, like, yeah, there are a bunch of like annoying people who try and make activism really exclusive, but there are also like tons of like amazing, wonderful, loving, normal people who take action, and that it's not actually as like complicated as it seems, and that we really wanted to like just make people feel like they can be included. Because I think a lot of things as well is I didn't realize that I was an activist. It's not that important whether you call yourself an activist or not, but I didn't realize that I was doing activism for a long time, because I thought to do activism you had to be this like one kind of brand of person or whatever. Like I think that just showing people that activism is just being active and just like, you know, doing something, and the organizing is doing things that people already probably know how to do. Like a lot of when I was in Extinction Rebellion or in Climate Camp Scotland or whatever else group, like a lot of my like role was just communicating stuff, like writing Google Docs about how best to communicate about this issue, or like writing press releases, or and a lot of that stuff is skills that loads of people actually have, or even just like filling in like spreadsheets of like making stuff happen, or planning things. Like a lot of it is very basic skills that loads of people have, or that are really easy to learn, and also that there's like a multiplicity of roles, and that I'm sure that like anyone who's listening to this, or like you will have a specific skill that is really needed in the climate movement, and you have a perspective, or whatever movement, and you have a perspective that is really like valuable and important, and you don't need to like read a stack of books before you get involved. You don't need to like know everything or know the right words. You just like have to get involved. And I think that's like, and a lot of me like wanting to talk about this stuff and communicate it just came from a place of like, I wish someone had said that to me like a couple of years ago, you know, or however long ago.
Yeah. Oh, totally. Yeah. I had, you know, my experience with activism, I was turned off by so many of the ways that people would approach it and the ways that they would frame it as so exclusive and, you know, oh, if you haven't read this text, then you don't know what you're talking about and you're not part of this conversation anymore. And like that, just like your impetus for creating the Yikes podcast was to kind of challenge some of that. A lot of my impetus for creating this podcast came from something very similar of like, I know that there's a better way to be having these conversations that invite people in instead of alienating people and making them feel like they're not worthy enough to be part of the movement. When right now we desperately need so many people to participate in the movement, so many people to step up and realize that they have power. And if you're going to, you know, do activist gatekeeping and things like that, it's just going to hurt the cause, hurt the ability to build that power. So yeah, I love the way that you're thinking about inviting people in. It's amazing.
I mean, because even especially around capitalism, there's so much like over like. It's made overly academic, I think, like as if you can't talk about or challenge capitalism unless you have a degree or 5 degrees in economics. And and also there's so much like sexism that goes into that as well. There's so much classism of like, oh, if you haven't like done this, that and the other, then you can't talk about it. And it's like, it's so counterintuitive to the work that we need to do. And like, I mean, there's a chapter on capitalism specifically in my book, and I felt like so nervous about writing that, and then like but in writing it, I was like, I can't wait. And then I like actually spoke my friend, who, oh gosh, now I'm nervous, but my friend who is my friend Jo, who's the co-host of Yikes, Jo's doing her PhD on degrowth and anti-capitalist like economic stuff. And I talked to her about it when I was writing it, and no, she's like a badass and is so cool, and I love her a lot. But she was like, the fact that you even feel and she was like, I know that you know loads about this, like obviously, and the fact that you even feel nervous about it, she was like, be honest about that in what you're writing. And I was trying to be honest, like, and be honest about the fact that that we need to move beyond this idea that people can't like need to know everything before they can challenge something, because we aren't going to get anywhere with that. And I was also in a kind of different vein, but more as well of like how we can open up our movements and stop gatekeeping so much, because there was a really brilliant panel with Adrienne Maree Brown and Angela Davis for UC Davis. It was like 50 years of feminist futures, and within it Adrienne Maree Brown was talking about their book We Will Not Cancel Us, which is really brilliant. It's like an abolitionist view on like how cancel culture can be used within our movement. So it's very specifically about within our movements.
Wow.
Not big people. But within it, like when talking on that, she was saying that like the bar for entry if we really want to transform the world, the bar for entry to be in needs to be like super low. And it can raise when people are inside the movements, and then we can have, and then we can like have that. But we need to like make movements that are open to people, because like the world that we're like trying to hope for and create is literally dependent upon loads of people who currently aren't who currently aren't doing activism or doing work to create a new world, or maybe don't have the best politics. Like it's reliant on those people being transformed, and so we can't have movements that are exclusive to those people. Like it's ridiculous. Like we need to create systems with which we can welcome people in. Yeah
And that's why I do my best to try to combat the talking points where people are just kind of shitting on liberals and stuff. Because those folks are the exact folks that we need to be having these conversations with, who we need to be inviting into the discussion and into the movement, not saying, oh, you're not as far left as me. Sorry. Like, I don't know.
Yeah, all this kind of like gotcha like culture of like, oh,
yeah.
I think so much of that like is such an ego boost thing. It's like, and that's why I think that's like, this is something. So Adrienne Marie Brown like writes a lot about, I think, about ego and stuff like that as well. Of like, we need to like tackle like, why are we interacting with each other in this way, like, and I would really recommend like anyone who's interested in more about this reading, I mean actually anyone, We Will Not Cancel Us by Adrienne Marie Brown. It's like a pamphlet, it's really short, but it's so brilliant on how we can interact with each other and how we can create like movements that people want to move towards, but also like movements that are actually trying to build the world that we want today as well.
Amazing. I will definitely check that out. So stepping back a little bit to some of the actual like direct action and work that you've done, I guess this is less direct action and more, it's a different strategy altogether, but you are one of 3 claimants in the paid to pollute case that has taken the UK government to court for financially subsidizing fossil fuel projects that are significantly contributing to climate catastrophe. Can you tell listeners why you chose to take part in this litigation campaign to challenge the twisted relationship between the government and the companies that are ruining our chances of preserving a livable planet?
So, I need to stop saying so at the start of every answer that I give, but subsidies are like this like not very sexy campaigning thing that we really need to focus on. Like, people don't want to talk about subsidies because it's not like this like fun or like attractive or exciting thing, but the entire fossil fuel industry is being propped up by government subsidies like all over the world. And if we can tackle these subsidies, then we can really tackle the industry at large. And part of tackling these subsidies, like part of that is actually to making that like a priority on the campaign like roster or whatever of all the campaign priorities we have. And so doing something like a court case can make that more of a priority. But I think that for me, my motivation was that I don't know, like just over a year before the court case was when I, with Extinction Rebellion Scotland, we occupied the road outside of the Department for Business, Energy, Industrial Strategy that I mentioned a bit before. And that whole site was about these subsidies. And in that moment, that like putting myself, so I locking on is like chaining yourself to infrastructure in the camp so that the police can't move you. I never thought that I would do an arrestable action because I was raised, also as someone racialized as black, I was like, I am not going to put myself at the mercy of the police. Like, that just seems like wrong for me to do, is like put myself like in that position. But when I was there, like I can't really like, it's almost like that for me was like my like big epiphany of like, I think so we were camping in the road for, obviously I could have been arrested actually to be honest for like camping in the road, but like, I mean, I was taking that risk, but we camped and occupied the road for a few, however many days it was. And every day our site was by the parliament. So the politicians would walk past us every morning as we were camping in the road to try and raise the alarm about climate. And they'd kind of like stand around for like a photo op, and then you could search up their voting record and see that they really don't care, or even if they do care, they're not acting on it. And it felt like we were losing our minds. Like we were like what can we do to really like shift change and really change things? I think in that moment it felt like the thing I could do was to like lock on and to allow our site to exist for a bit longer. Because we were talking about all these subsidies and everything, and it felt like a last resort locking on, and I was locked on for about 8 hours and ended up in a police court, like surrounded by police in the middle of the night and no one else there because they'd removed everyone else. And it was quite scary, but that's like a bit of a longer story. But that felt like a last resort, and then still we were kind of heading for disaster. And so when I was approached by some folks who were like, there's this court case going on, it's around the same topics that you've been campaigning about subsidies, would you be willing to put your name like on this case, would you like be willing to consider it? And I mean, I think that court cases are also a last resort because they are incredibly expensive, like ridiculously expensive, and they take a lot of I haven't really spoken about it at length, like, but like it's just also, it's hard to explain the stress of it, but like it's this weird form of campaigning as well, because I'm not a lawyer. So my name was on the case. I was a claimant on the case along with 2 other people, but I really had no power as to whether we won or lost. And that was something that was very different from any other campaigning that I'd done before. I had a huge amount of power over how the case was perceived and like how we could use the case as a movement building like strategy and how we could use the information.
Amazing. Yeah.
But I mean, I think what I mean by it's being a last resort as well is that it's really stressful. Like, I mean, I had alt-right like websites writing articles about me and like because of the case and like all this other stuff, and it just puts you in like a different position. And then it also then had to sit in court like and hear the government defend lots of, in my opinion, indefensible stuff, and like and then being unable to do anything about it in that moment is like quite, and having to be so polite about it because obviously because in UK court you have to like if you go to the toilet you have to like bow on the way out. It's very weird.
Oh my god, really?
It's basically just quite stressful. Yeah. No, it was, I was, and also the whole time I was like so scared that my phone was going to make a noise or something, and I was like, and then I started being so like, the illogical thoughts was like, what if the judge hates pink and that they're seeing me dressed all in pink and like I'm not going to give them the right decision. But basically it was a last resort thing, but it was a very like it's trying to be strategic as well. It's being like, okay, we've used direct action. Let's try and use the legal system, knowing that like whatever happens from that case, like whether we win or lost, that doesn't legitimize the legal system. We're not saying that like the legal system can give us all justice. I think what we're trying to do is be like, how can we use this to our best ability to reveal things that have not been revealed, because the UK government refused to admit, well, they actually openly denied these payments were happening, and then they were forced to in court to say, oh, actually no, wait a minute, this has actually been happening, because they can't lie in a court of law. And they were, and now that information is like public, like that's out there for that to be used by other campaigns. It's not just about like us holding it. It's like, this is now public record. Yeah, people can use that. Like people can be made more, and I think this is where awareness can come in, because people can be made more aware that their taxpayers' money is going into the pockets of multi-billion pound oil and gas companies, and that can hopefully, like, a lot of this is also trying to impact the social license to exist of these companies. Like, as a people, as a collective, we, without knowing it, we give a social license to certain institutions, to companies, to systems to exist. We say that they aren't causing, either they're not causing enough harm for us to worry about enough about them, or we think that they're doing good things. And that's why these companies invest so much money in greenwashing campaigns, and that's why they don't want their image to be impacted. And cases like this can have an impact on their social license, because people can be like, wait a minute, like, I didn't know that my money was going to these companies. I didn't know the government was complicit in that. And so maybe I'm going to change how I vote, or maybe I'm going to change, like, maybe I'm not going to support this company, or whatever else it is, or maybe I'm going to join a movement to campaign directly against this company. That's the best option of all of those ones I've mentioned. But I think that I think that it wasn't just about like the legal case, because also for complete clarity, we lost the case like on legal ground, on like for the legal argument, and that was also hard. That's another part of it that was hard, was like mentally dealing with that was difficult. But I think that even though we lost the case and the law wasn't changed, because what would have happened if the law would have been forced to be changed? The law wasn't forced to be changed because of our case, but significant changes have happened because of the case at the same time. Like things like a windfall tax happened in the UK. I mean, that it's not good enough, but policies that wouldn't have previously, I think, been considered as much have now been like more central, and people, like, it has had I do think it has had a big impact, but it's also like has to be this active thing that I have to remind myself that we like, that losing isn't like winning isn't linear. Yeah. And we are going to lose things along the way, and that's fine.
Oh, totally.
And that doesn't mean that it was an overall loss. Yeah.
I keep thinking about one of my favorite people who I've been collaborating with because of the show. His handle on Instagram and elsewhere is Prepper Pig. But he's a community organizer. He does a lot of climate justice work. He's a really brilliant person. But he always talks about how, like, doing organizing, doing, sustained movement building, you need to just keep the drumbeat going. You can't, it's not about like getting that one thing done and then you did it and then you pat yourself on the back and then you go home and you feel good about yourself. It's about just like building that sustained drumbeat, that sustained movement. So I think about that all the time now. How can you put yourself into a project in a way that isn't going to just fizzle out immediately, So We're just about to wrap up here, but I wanted to ask you, why do you think capitalism is incompatible with a livable planet?
So we're currently, I said so again, sorry everyone. We're currently heading towards like climate disaster. Like that is the reality. Like for many, that is actually people's current reality. It's not just a future thing.
Yeah.
And that is because we have a system that only prioritizes growth in capital and like exponential growth on a finite planet. So like it's this idea that we should constantly be like capitalism just requires like a constant extraction from the land and from peoples in order to continue. It doesn't value like clean air or clean water or life. It just values profit. And like many companies are literally legally bound to make as much profit as possible and to grow. Like that is the system. And that is completely incompatible with a planet that has finite resources and with like joy and happiness for peoples as well. And so the idea that we can just green capitalism, so green, just basically like swap out what is currently, so swap out fossil fuels for just renewables, but still owned by private companies, or to just swap out diesel or petrol cars for electric cars. Like that idea also just doesn't actually make sense with our like planetary boundaries. Like, so the kind of, the boundaries with which our planet can still survive in. Because, for example, if we talk about like, so electric cars, which are a really big example of green capitalism, is this idea that like we can just switch every petrol car out for an electric car. That would require the production of so many electric vehicles that still requires extraction from the land in Bolivia or in other countries all over the world that still harms planet and still harms people, and that actually still requires like significant amounts of energy and emissions that are just not compatible with a livable planet. And so what we need to do is realize that it's actually this system that has caused all of this, that it's this system that is requiring many of us to be living out like a life that is just not compatible with life here. And so instead of just trying to make that system look better or green that system and just kind of delay the date of climate disaster, let's instead just like actually tackle the system itself and create something better that actually does work for all of us. Because there's many reasons as well. Like obviously I think that people make out that green capitalism will save us because it will allow us to continue our lives as they are now, but green. But I think that the lives that we have now, like that doesn't motivate me to continue climate work. I'm like, if I was doing this work just to uphold the world as it is now, like that doesn't make me feel motivated. Like the world as it is now under capitalism is there's like billions of people living in conditions that like are not compatible with life, like presently. People do not have very basic things needed for survival. Even people who do have those basic things for survival, like we have significant impacts on like mental health because of like capitalism. We have significant impacts on so many different parts of our life. We have restricted access to joy. Like this is like why are we just trying to hold on to it? It's not even been around that long. I always say this, I'm like, there are many things that have been around for much longer. Like why are we like, why is it as oh gosh, I've forgotten the name of the person, but how it's like, why is it easier to like imagine the end of the world than the end of capitalism? Like we can imagine and demand more and better. And I think that it's important that we do. And there are like, I would really recommend if anyone like is interested in reading like something more at length on this, obviously Naomi Klein's This Changes Everything is really brilliant on it. But also so recently, more recently, A People's Green New Deal by Max Agile is like such a great book that will really get into this more. But I don't think, I'm not sure if I fully explained very much, but we're near the end, so hopefully that was
no, you definitely did. You did in a brilliant fucking way, so great job. And now all we have left is just some plugs. I mean, so I would love to use these last couple moments just to plug some of the work that you're doing, the Yikes podcast. Where can people go to find what you're doing, follow along, support you? Yeah, what should folks do?
yeah, you can find the Yikes podcast on all podcasting platforms. We do also have a Patreon, but that just means that we like are able to do the work we do, but there's no pressure for people to join, obviously. And you can find that on like patreon.com/the Yikes podcast, and you can just search the Yikes podcast wherever you get your pods, and you'll be able to get it. I guess, and another thing to plug is it's a wee while from now, but I have written a book called "It's Not That Radical: Climate Action to Transform Our World," which is basically just trying to like reframe the climate crisis or its solutions as like the best that we can hope for is the same world but green. Like we can demand more, we can demand better. We have to like dismantle capitalism and destroy it. We have to tackle and destroy white supremacy and whiteness. Like all of these things are essential for climate justice, and it's just trying to like do that in an accessible and galvanizing way. And it's not just a book that you read; it's hopefully a book that you do and you transform the world with. But please do not wait to do the transformation work until it comes out in April. Like, please start doing it now. If you, I hope that it can add to the work that you're doing. And I think the only other thing that I'm like, is there anything? If you're wherever you are based, actually, nothing to quickly plug is that there is a campaign against the Rosebank oil field in the UK. Rosebank is one of the biggest undeveloped oil field in the North Sea. It is 3 times the size of the Cambo oil field.
Oh my God, I didn't realize.
Mentioned before. And if it's extracted, it's huge. If it's extracted and burned from, this oil field alone, so Rosebank alone, would create the same emission or more emissions actually than the combined annual emissions of every single low-income country. So there's 28 low-income countries. That's 700 million people in the global south, and this one oil field would create more emissions than all of those peoples, than all of those countries. It is like ridiculous that the UK government is trying to approve it. And like Cambo, we have to stop Rosebank too. And so if you can find all the information about that on @StopCambo on all social media. And even if you just Google Stop Rosebank, you'll find loads of actions that anyone from all over the world can do. So please do join us in solidarity, and we need to stop this field.
Hell yeah, that's so important. I'm so glad we ended on that note. Mikaela, thank you so much for coming on the show. You are doing the most important work out there. I know you don't want to highlight, individuals that are, and prop them up as the ones that are doing all the work, but you are doing a lot of the work, and I love that you are educating others about, the way to join the climate movement. So thank you so much. I'm so impressed by you, and I really appreciate you coming on the show.
No, thank you so much. Seriously, I was really, really looking forward to this, and I'm so glad that we managed to do it. I've really enjoyed our conversation a lot, and I'm also deeply grateful for the work that you're doing, because we need as many of us out there doing that kind of shifting the narrative, and also injecting a bit of joy in there too. And I'm definitely going to be having is it No More Billionaires?
No More Billionaires.
Cocktail.
Awesome.
Love it.
Cheers to that. Cheers in solidarity.
My empty wine glass.
Nice.